If you didn't know, chickens are often considered the gateway livestock into raising animals on your farm or on your homestead. And there are a lot of good reasons why people choose chickens over any other livestock. But in this video, I'm going to give you several reasons why you should start with pigs instead of chickens on your farm or on your homestead. I'm Rob from Battle Family Farms, and I've been on this mission for several years now to regenerate the landscapes on our farm, increase soil health, while also providing nutritious food for our customers. And in that process, I've raised meat chickens, egg layers, ducks, geese, turkeys, goats, milk goats, meat goats, cows, pigs, and honeybees. By far, pigs are the easiest, most profitable, most productive livestock on a small farm, on a homestead, or even on a large farm. Before we talk about the benefits of raising pigs, let's first discuss the other livestock and what we do and don't like about them. As we begin discussing some of these various livestock, let me say from the beginning that my approach here is not just having an animal on the homestead, but rather something that you're trying to be profitable with. Egg-laying chickens are usually where people get started, and there's a good reason for that. They're small, they're easy to acquire from chicks to sometimes you can even find juveniles and start raising them. For people who have no experience with animals, even pets, it's a great way to get started. And you can keep just a few in your backyard, whether it's 3 or 4 or 5 or even a dozen. But there are some downsides to egg-laying chickens. First, they don't lay consistently. As the daylights get shorter, from a business perspective, it's much more labor intensive. You have year-round work to keep the chickens happy and healthy, and they're not always laying very well. From a price point and profit margin, it's really hard to be very profitable. For example, let's say you're selling your eggs for $4 or $5 a dozen. If you sell $20 in eggs, you might have $3 or $4 in profit from those eggs if you're raising a lot of hens. Chances are, if you have just a few, you're not going to. But that's a small sale, and people will keep coming back for them, but that's a lot of work for one small sale. Further, so many backyard egg producers just sell their eggs for $1 to $2 a dozen, and they don't even cover the feed costs. These are just people that are keeping them in their backyard. They're just trying to get rid of excess eggs and think any money is good. The problem with that is you're competing with all these different people who have flushes of eggs in the spring when chickens begin laying much more rapidly. It's also very hard to be profitable if you're counting your labor unless you scale up very quickly. In my mind, egg-laying chickens are great to have a dozen or so in your backyard, or to have several hundred to help offset the cost of the overhead. There are a lot of predators that easily get chickens. For example, in Mississippi, we have a lot of owls and hawks that come in and migrate here over winter. We had a lot of problems with owls trying to poach our chickens at night. And so what that would mean is we'd have to keep them in a coop overnight, let them out in the morning, and that's just a lot more time on the farm. If you live on the farm, that may be easy enough to do, but it's really difficult here. Now, on the other hand, meat chickens are, in my mind, a much better opportunity than egg layers. The good thing about the meat chickens is it's a short window of time that you're raising them. In fact, with the meat chickens, the pen that would contain your egg layers can contain meat chickens for a period of 6 to 7 weeks, and you'll be more profitable than you in that 6 to 7 weeks than you do egg layers in that same pen for an entire year. There's also less competition than trying to sell eggs that everybody does. There are some people raising chickens on pasture, but if you're trying to raise some chickens on pasture for meat, you can have a pretty decent market. The quality of the chicken is really good, and there are people looking for more free-range, pasture-raised chickens. The bad thing about meat chickens is the domestic dogs are usually the biggest issue in my area, and processing is really difficult. I found that I can process chickens by myself faster than if I have 2 or 3 people who are helping me who have never processed chickens a whole lot. It's really difficult for me to process more than about 50 to 75 chickens per day by myself. If you can find the good market for the meat chickens, and if you can handle the processing yourself, it is a pretty good option. Now, it does require a little bit of overhead to find a good plucker to help reduce processing time. And you do have to keep those chickens checked twice a day, but the meat chickens, for a short window of time, it's hard to beat. Now, I've had ducks. I've never raised meat ducks, although we did eat some of ours. The good thing about ducks is that there are a couple breeds like Khaki Campbells and Welsh Harlequins that can be excellent egg layers. Ducks tend to be pretty decent foragers, and so it helps reduce some of the grain costs. And duck eggs demand a premium price if you have duck eggs to sell. They're larger, they're richer. I'd rather eat a duck egg any day of the week. One of the bad things about raising ducks for eggs is that they tend to lay their eggs in the morning, and so if they're not penned in a pretty tight area, they'll just keep their eggs scattered all over the pasture where they're sleeping, and it's an egg hunt trying to find them. It's also incredibly difficult to know whether you missed an egg the day before or the week before, and so keeping them up at night until about mid-morning so that they lay all their eggs in one place, and then you can easily find them. Geese can be really good livestock. They're excellent foragers, just surviving on good quality grass alone. They demand a really good price for their eggs. The problem is they only lay a few handfuls of eggs every year, and it's only in the spring. One goose with your chickens or your ducks or other livestock can make a very good guard animal. But the bad thing, again, you only get a few eggs, and there's not much market for the geese. If you're raising the geese for meat, it's hard to get a good market for goose, and they're difficult to process. Now let's turn our attention to raising cows on a farm. I have more experience with cows than I do with any other of the animals on our farm combined. From the time I was a kid, my dad changing my diapers on the farm, I wanted to go to the farm with him. And so I grew up working cattle. One of the best things about cattle is if you have good quality pasture, they can perform really well on pasture. And if you learn to manage cows well and their grazing habits, you can get by with feeding very little hay. We'll come back to the hay problem in a moment. But there's usually a great market for beef, whether you're selling grass-finished beef, grain-finished beef, or even if you're putting beef into the conventional sale barns, it's usually pretty easy to get a good market for beef. And we have a really good market for people who want to purchase a whole beef. So let's look at some of the downsides with keeping beef. They're herd animals, and they need at least 2 or 3 per group. I'm not a big fan of keeping just one cow. Some people will keep a single milk cow, and that may be a different story, but they're herd animals, and they're better off in larger groups. Most importantly, you need a large land mass, and this varies wildly depending on an area. For example, in our area, a lot of people will raise 1 cow per acre. Though some areas, especially out west, it may take 20 to 40 acres per cow. It just depends on your climate, the pasture quality, and your experience with managing those cattle. And that brings us up to the next issue, is supplementing with hay, and this can be wildly expensive in many areas. I'm just now beginning to figure out how to eliminate feeding hay in my area. We live in North Mississippi, and feeding hay is where things get really, really expensive. The infrastructure needs are greater for cows. For example, you can raise them on electric fencing, which is very cheap. It's easy to put up. But if you have cows on, let's say you want to keep 5 cows on 30 acres, well, you've got to put up 30 acres of perimeter fence. And then if you really want to make your rotationally grazed moves easier, it's good to put up some good permanent cross fencing, and then use your smaller pasture paddocks with temporary electric fencing. And this leads us to another issue. Cows are just capital intensive animals. They grow slowly, even though they do really well. For example, it can be 3 years or more from the time that a calf is conceived to the time they're born, raised, and go to the processor. Plus, cows only have 1 calf per year. And even if you just raise stockers like 400 or 600 pound animals, it can still take a year or so to get those animals to a good finished weight. So if you buy a 400 pound stocker and then want to finish them on grass, it can still be a year or more before you recover the cost of the calf and make your profit off of the calf. And this brings us to nutrition. There's an art and a science if you're going to sell a finished animal. Many people who have produced beef and just sold them to a conventional sale barn don't really know what a good finished animal looks like. It's really difficult to try to get a beef to be finished on grass alone. You can grass feed them, but finishing them is a very different story. Because of these downsides with keeping cows, the fact that they're capital intensive, they take a long time to grow out, they take a lot of land, and having good fencing to make your pasture moves much easier, these things lead a lot of people to try having small ruminants like goats and sheep. People like them because they're smaller, but if you can raise meat sheep and meat goats, there's a really good market for them that's underserved, and I'd encourage you to give that a try, because a lot of people like me who've grown up raising beef or pork don't want to deal with the hassle of goats and sheep. There are a couple downsides to goats and sheep. First, there are parasite issues with a lot of genetic lines. It requires a good bit of managing. We've raised just a few goats and no sheep, but that's just something to be aware of. Fencing, especially for goats, can be an issue. My philosophy is if a lizard or a squirrel can go through your fence or climb your fence, so can a goat. We don't want to have to deal with goats getting out. Now, one livestock that people often don't consider as livestock are honeybees. Now, there are a lot of great things about honeybees. It's a wildly fascinating livestock. There's always a good market for honey and even for honey products. We also sell nucleus colonies of bees. And so there's a lot of good things about honeybees. The bad thing is that their upfront cost can be expensive. Now, you can get anywhere from $150 to $500 per hive of bees that you have. Plus, you've got to have the harvesting and the handling equipment. And some years, like last year for us, were not very productive honey years. If you're a hobby beekeeper, the $200 or $400 per hive is not that big of a deal. However, if you're trying to be profitable with honeybees and trying to keep 20 to 50 to maybe even 100 hives or more, those hives can be really expensive. You can save a lot of money by building your own and cutting costs. That's also labor intensive if you have other livestock or if you're just being a small part-time farmer. Each of these livestock that I've mentioned have their good and their bad qualities, but I'm here to tell you, I think pigs, for many people, are the most underappreciated livestock that you can have on your small farm. Now, before we start talking about pigs, let me just say that if you've never kept pigs before, I highly encourage you to try a standard meat breed pig. Things like Duroc, Hereford, Chester White, Hampshire, Berkshire, and many others. I would not suggest that you try the Mangalitzes, Cooney-Coonies, pot-bellied, Idaho pastured pigs, or others until you've tried those standard meat pigs. When I'm talking about pigs, I mean those standard type meat pigs. Now, one of the best things about them is that from the time you get a feeder pig at roughly weaning age, 30 to 50 to 60 pounds, they can be 300 pounds in 5 to 6 months. It is absolutely amazing how quickly they grow. There are very few predators for meat breed pigs. We don't have bears in our areas, though domestic dogs typically are the biggest problems that we have with them. Coyotes, foxes, and those kind of animals don't bother our pigs. We did have one issue with a fox and some baby piglets, but that's a whole nother story. Most predators leave pigs alone, especially once they're weaned. It's relatively cheap to get started with pigs. Let's say you spent $1,000 on a good charger, some electric fencing,
How you doing, baby?
and your first sets of pigs. That $1,000 could easily be spent on 2 beehives with all the equipment that you need. However, in 6 months with your 2 pigs, you'll have 300-400 pounds of meat. It'll take a year or more with honeybees. So there's a quick turnaround on the feeders. Also, each sow can have 6 to 10 to 12 piglets.
Now,
and from the time they're conceived to the time they're finished is 10 months of age. If you have a decent idea of swine nutrition, you can supplement a lot of their feed, especially if you have some wooded lots in the fall where you can let the pigs graze on acorns, hickory nuts, etc. It is hard to beat a good acorn-finished hog. They're just really, really good tasting meat. Pigs are very personable, especially if you socialize them. I would suggest feeding them by hand. Some of them will always be a little standoffish, but many of them will come up to you and rub you. One of my biggest problems when I'm trying to video our breeder pigs is that Ferdinand, our boar, who is very large, will come up and try to rub on me while I'm trying to do some video. It can be very difficult and distracting to do my work sometimes. Pigs are also easily trained. Spend some time training them to an electric fence. They'll come. They're easily trained to a specific call. They're just really, really good livestock. Some of the downside with pigs is they're mostly going to be grain-fed to get a quality product. And there are cheaper feeds that you can feed your pigs. In fact, at the end of this video, I encourage you to watch this video about our cheap pig feeds, really cheap. You can expect it to cost you $300 to $500 to get a pig to the finished weight of about 275 to 325 pounds. So there is some cost there, but you also come back with each pig bringing you back 150 or so pounds of meat. By far, the worst thing about pigs to me is that it is so easy to get lost in some of the lard breeds. These very specialty breeds that take longer to grow out, that are smaller, or that have a lot of fat in them. In my experience, most people that purchase pork don't want a lard-type pig to eat. They may love the meat, but they don't want to pay extra money for that. Are pigs right for you? Maybe they are, maybe they're not. We've certainly had our tests and trials with pigs. But of all the livestock we've raised, by far, they're the best. So I'm kind of curious to know, do you raise pigs? Do you raise other livestock? And which ones are your favorites and why?